I thought I knew the man I married, kind, driven, loyal. We had history, a future, and a bond one believed was unbreakable. But the truth doesn't always shatter loudly. Sometimes, it unfolds slowly, in late-night texts, in unexplained absences, in the way someone stops meeting your eyes. What I discovered nearly destroyed me, another life, another woman, and a version of him I never saw coming. This is not just a story of infidelity. It's about losing the love of your life while they're still sleeping beside you. And it's about the terrifying, liberating moment you choose to walk away. Part 1, Before the Cracks Showed. Ethan and I met in college, freshman year. He was the quiet one in the back of our literature class, always scribbling in his notebook. I sat in the front row, hungry to impress. The first time he spoke to me, he quoted Sylvia Plath and asked if I believed in fate. I laughed and said no, but I married him 5 years later. There was no dramatic proposal. He asked me over coffee one morning, sliding a small velvet box across the table like it was the most natural thing in the world. I cried anyway. And when we said our vows 2 years after that, I meant every word, in sickness and health, in joy and heartbreak, in truth and, well, I thought I understood what truth meant. We bought a house together, a charming little place with creaky floors and ivy crawling along the back fence. We painted the walls ourselves, our clothes splattered with color. Ethan cooked. I gardened. We made plans, kids eventually, maybe a dog, vacations we never got around to taking. But looking back, I realize I never saw the first crack. Because love, real, blinding love, makes you believe you're immune to ruin. I was naive. Or maybe I just wanted so badly to believe that nothing could touch us, not after everything we'd already built. The first change was small. Subtle. Ethan started coming home later. Said work was overwhelming, a new boss, tighter deadlines, more responsibility. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He'd never lied to me before. He seemed tired all the time. Snapped more easily. Forgot little things, my birthday dinner reservations, the anniversary card he always remembered. I brushed it off. Told myself stress does that. People go through phases. I asked him once, gently, if everything was okay. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Of course, he said, brushing a kiss against my forehead. Don't worry so much. So I didn't. I stopped asking questions. I stopped noticing the way he smiled at his phone, the texts he always tilted away from my view. The weekend work retreats that didn't include phone calls. I told myself to trust him, that love without trust wasn't love at all. And Ethan had earned my trust over a decade of memories and midnight conversations and quiet Sundays. But love can be quiet when it dies. It doesn't always scream. It withers slowly, like a flame starved of air. I didn't see the smoke. I only smelled the ashes once it was too late. It was a Thursday evening when the first real crack shattered the illusion. I was cleaning out the guest room closet, looking for an old photo album, when I found the shoebox. It wasn't hidden, not really. Just wedged behind a pile of winter scarves. I opened it, expecting dust and forgotten mementos. Inside were printed photographs. Not of us. Of her. A woman I didn't know. Smiling. Laughing. Wrapped in Ethan's arms. One photo had a date printed on the back, just 6 weeks ago. My heart stopped. My breath vanished. My hands shook so violently I dropped the box. The photos scattered across the floor like confessions. I sat there for an hour. Staring. Waiting to wake up. When Ethan came home that night, I couldn't speak. I just looked at him, really looked, and saw it. The guilt. The panic. The stranger behind the familiar face. He asked what was wrong, but I didn't answer. I simply turned, walked into the guest room, and pointed at the floor. That's when the lies began unraveling. He didn't deny it. Not fully. Just stood there, defeated, like a man who'd been expecting this moment but hoping it wouldn't come. He said it was a mistake. That it meant nothing. That he didn't know how to stop it once it started. That he still loved me. I laughed. A bitter, broken sound I didn't recognize. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know this man. Not anymore. Not the way I thought I did. And this? This was only the beginning. Before everything fell apart, our life looked picture perfect, the kind of marriage people admired from the outside. We were the couple who held hands in grocery stores, who hosted dinners with laughter echoing through the walls, who exchanged anniversary gifts with handwritten notes that always ended in forever. Part 2, The Weight of His Silence. That night, after the photograph spilled every truth he never spoke, we didn't yell. We didn't cry. We just stood there, two people who once promised each other forever, separated by a minefield of silence and shattered illusions. The floor between us was littered with proof, but somehow, his face hurt more than the pictures. He didn't look ashamed. He looked tired. And somehow, that was worse. I didn't mean for it to happen, he said eventually, voice low. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, the photos, the shoebox, maybe even the years I'd given him like offerings to a god I no longer believed in. But I didn't move. I just sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the edge of the mattress like it could anchor me to a world that suddenly made no sense. What didn't you mean? I asked. The part where you touched her? Or the part where you lied to me for months? His silence was louder than any confession. I pressed again. Who is she, Ethan? He hesitated, just for a moment. Then, her name's Mia. Mia, a name I didn't know, but now would never forget. It tasted bitter, like betrayal. I swallowed it anyway. She works with you? A nod. For how long? A few months. Is it still going on? That one took him longer. Too long. I closed my eyes. That was my answer. I spent that night in the guest room, the same one where I found the shoebox, where I once imagined putting a crib, painting clouds on the walls, building a nursery full of dreams. Now, it reeked of betrayal. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. Not clearly, but enough. A smile that wasn't mine. A laugh that didn't belong in our story. The next morning, I left before Ethan woke up. I needed air, space, a version of reality where I wasn't the betrayed wife with shaking hands and a raw heart. I drove without a destination, ended up at a small beach outside the city. It was cold, windy, empty, just me and the sound of waves crashing against the shore like distant thunder. I sat there for hours, watching the water, trying to piece together the moments I missed. The signs, the way he started pulling away when I thought we were getting closer. Had he ever loved me? Or had I built our marriage on stories I told myself? I thought about our anniversaries, the late-night takeout dinners, the playlist he made me for our road trip to Oregon. Were those moments real, or just placeholders between the lies? My phone buzzed. Ethan. I didn't answer. He texted, "Please come home. We need to talk." But what was left to say? When I finally returned, the house felt unfamiliar, like stepping into someone else's life. I passed the kitchen where he used to dance with me barefoot, the hallway where we hung wedding photos. I paused in front of the frame, our faces frozen in time. So certain, so happy. I ripped it off the wall. Ethan was sitting on the couch. He stood when he saw me, like he wasn't sure if he should come closer or stay back. I kept my distance. "I'm sorry," he began. But I stopped him. "Don't," I said. "Don't insult me with apologies when you've been building a second life behind my back." His eyes dropped. "It wasn't like that." "Wasn't it?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I didn't plan it." We started talking. It was harmless. Then, "You fell into her bed?" His jaw clenched. "I didn't come here to fight." I laughed again, hollow. "Then maybe you shouldn't have cheated." I asked him a question I hadn't wanted to before. "Do you love her?" He looked up. And for a second, just a second, his eyes said yes. He didn't need to say it aloud. That was the moment something inside me cracked completely. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt empty, like someone had scooped out my insides and replaced them with cold air. I walked upstairs and began packing a bag. Not because I had a plan, not because I knew where I was going, but because I couldn't stay in a house where every corner whispered lie. He followed me up. Please don't go. We can fix this. I turned. You already left me, Ethan. You just didn't have the decency to walk out the door. I left before sunrise. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in my rearview mirror, but the pain, the betrayal, didn't shrink with it. It sat in the passenger seat beside me, heavy and loud. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing with complete clarity. This was no longer our story. This was mine now. Part 3, Picking Up the Pieces. Leaving was the hardest thing I ever did. Not because I was scared of starting over, but because I was terrified of what I'd become without Ethan, without the man I thought I knew. I was angry, broken, and so painfully lost, but I knew I couldn't live in the shadow of his betrayal any longer. For the first few weeks, I stayed with my sister. She welcomed me with open arms and silent understanding. She never asked for details, never pushed me to talk. Sometimes, the quiet was the most healing thing anyone could offer. But the silence also gave me too much time to think. I replayed everything, every laugh, every touch, every whispered promise. I searched for signs I missed, moments I ignored. The truth was brutal. Ethan's betrayal wasn't an accident or a mistake. It was a choice, one he made every day he hid his second life from me. And yet, despite the pain, a small part of me still wanted to believe in him, wanted to believe that beneath the lies was the man I loved. But I knew I couldn't keep holding on to something that hurt me. I started therapy, not because I thought it would fix everything, but because I needed someone to help me understand how to live again, how to trust myself, how to find peace. Every session was raw. Every tear shed was a small victory. Friends became my lifeline. Emma, my closest childhood friend, was there every step of the way, sometimes with wine, sometimes with distraction, sometimes just a shoulder to cry on. She reminded me who I was before this betrayal, strong, vibrant, worthy. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into my job, finding solace in deadlines and tasks that didn't require emotional currency. It was exhausting, but necessary. The hardest part was the quiet moments, waking up alone, sitting in an empty apartment, hearing the silence where his laughter used to be. The house we shared became a distant memory, a museum of everything lost. One day, while sorting through boxes I had packed in haste, I found a letter Ethan wrote but never sent. It was tucked between pages of a book he loved. "I'm sorry," it began. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you find happiness, with or without me." The words felt like ashes, but they also felt like an ending. An ending I needed to accept. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I reconnected with old passions, painting, hiking, journaling. Each brushstroke, each step, each word on paper was a reclaiming of myself, a declaration that I was still here, still whole, despite everything. I started setting boundaries, not just with Ethan, who begged for a second chance, but with myself. No more denial, no more excuses, no more silent suffering. And then, out of the blue, I met someone new. Not a rebound, not a distraction, just someone who saw me, really saw me, the scars, the strength, the story. His name was Daniel, and he was patient, kind, and genuine. I didn't jump into anything. I took my time, learning to trust again in small, careful steps. Because this story, my story, wasn't about finding someone to replace Ethan. It was about finding myself. Part 4, Ghosts of the Past. The beginning with Daniel was like stepping into sunlight after a long, cold winter. His presence was gentle, unassuming, the kind that didn't demand but quietly invited trust. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to laugh without the shadow of doubt creeping in. But the ghosts of my past were relentless. Every text from Ethan was a cold reminder that some chapters don't close easily. He begged for forgiveness, promising change. But I saw through the desperation, not to mend, but to reclaim. I struggled with guilt. Was I wrong to move on? Did that mean all our years were a lie? Then came the nightmares. In sleep, I relived the moment I found the photos, heard their whispered conversations echoing down empty hallways. I woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, feeling as vulnerable as the night it all came crashing down. Daniel never pressured me to explain, but when I did, his patience was endless. "You're not broken," he said softly one night. "You're healing." Those words became my lifeline. But healing wasn't linear. There were days when I crumbled, when the pain hit so hard I couldn't breathe. On those days, I clung to my journal, writing until the ink blurred, trying to make sense of a heart shattered into fragments. I kept my distance from Ethan, but the legal process for divorce began to loom over me like a storm cloud. Every phone call from his lawyer reminded me that the life I thought was secure was unraveling completely. And then, the unexpected happened. I bumped into Mia, the woman who had taken my place, at a cafe near my work. She looked nothing like I imagined. No smug smiles, no arrogance, just a woman caught in the same tangled web of pain and regret. We didn't speak at first, just stared, two broken souls acknowledging the wreckage. Later, over coffee, she told her story, how she never wanted to be the other woman, how she had her own demons, her own loneliness. It didn't excuse what happened, but it humanized the betrayal in a way I wasn't ready for. The encounter left me shaken, but also strangely calm. Maybe because finally, I wasn't alone in this mess. Daniel held my hand that night, steady and unwavering. "Whatever happens," he said, "we face it together." I wanted to believe him. But the scars on my heart whispered caution. Trust wasn't easy anymore. Not with others, not even with myself. Yet, despite everything, I dared to hope. Hope that this time, love wouldn't hurt like before. Hope that I could rewrite my story, on my terms. Because after betrayal, there's only one way forward. Part 5, The Battle for Closure. The day I signed the divorce papers felt surreal. A mix of relief, grief, and something like finality washing over me all at once. Sitting across from Ethan in that sterile office, watching him avoid my gaze, I realized the man I once loved was now a stranger. A chapter 1 was ready to close, no matter how painful. The legal battle was more than just paperwork. It was a confrontation with every lie he told, every broken promise he made. His lawyers pushed for concessions, while mine fought to protect what was mine, my dignity, my future. Between court dates and negotiations, I found myself revisiting old memories, the first time we met, our wedding day, the late nights planning a future I thought we shared. Each memory was a thread unraveling, exposing the truth beneath the facade. Friends rallied around me, their support a lifeline. Emma was relentless, attending hearings with me, reminding me of my strength when I wanted to give up. Daniel stood quietly by my side, his presence a steady anchor in a sea of chaos. Yet, Ethan's silence was deafening. No apologies, no attempts at reconciliation, just a cold distance that made the betrayal sting even more. One evening, after a particularly grueling court session, I sat alone in the empty house we once called home. The walls echoed with ghosts of laughter, whispered dreams, and the crushing weight of loss. I realized then that this house wasn't just a building, it was the tomb of our marriage. I started packing up memories, photographs, gifts, mementos, each item a painful reminder of what once was. As I boxed up the last of our wedding photos, I felt a strange sense of release. Letting go was more than physical, it was emotional. I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. Through the pain, I discovered an unexpected strength, a fierce determination not to be defined by Ethan's betrayal but by my own courage to walk away. Daniel and I grew closer, our bond forged not just by love but by shared vulnerability. He never rushed me, never demanded more than I was ready to give. With him, I learned that trust could be rebuilt, slowly, carefully, authentically. The divorce finalized months later felt less like an end and more like a new beginning. Standing outside the courthouse, I didn't look back. The past was behind me, and ahead lay an uncertain, but hopeful, future. I had survived the unimaginable. Betrayal had shattered my world, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was ready to write the next chapter, on my own terms. Part 6, Healing and New Beginnings. After the divorce was finalized, life began to feel both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in years, I was alone, but it was a solitude I chose, not one forced upon me. The space I created was both physical and emotional, a sanctuary where I could finally start to heal. Daniel became more than just a partner. He was a mirror reflecting the strength I didn't always see in myself. We took things slowly, savoring each moment of rebuilding trust. He never pushed, never expected me to forget the past. Instead, he accepted it as part of my story. In those quiet moments together, I found a softness returning to my heart, a cautious hope that love could be kind again. But healing wasn't a straight line. There were days when the weight of the past dragged me down, memories surfacing unbidden, doubts creeping in like unwelcome shadows. I often asked myself if I was ready to love again, if I deserved happiness after everything. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone in my recovery. My therapist helped me navigate the tangled emotions, anger, grief, fear, and guided me toward forgiveness. Not for Ethan, but for myself. Forgiveness was the key to unlocking the chains of resentment that threatened to hold me captive. I rediscovered old passions. Painting returned as a form of therapy, each brushstroke a cathartic release. Hiking became a symbol of moving forward, one step at a time, even when the path was steep and uncertain. Work flourished too. I threw myself into new projects, found joy in accomplishments, and rebuilt my confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Yet, despite progress, trust remained fragile. The betrayal had left scars deeper than I expected. Opening my heart to Daniel meant risking everything again, but his patience and unwavering support made the leap feel less daunting. One evening, under a sky painted with stars, Daniel and I talked about the future. He didn't promise perfection, only honesty, respect, and partnership. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life where love was safe. But life isn't without surprises. Just as I began to feel steady, news came that Ethan was moving back to town. The man who shattered my world was re-entering the same space I was trying to rebuild. The thought unsettled me, stirring old fears and unresolved anger. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. But this time, I was determined to face it on my terms, not as the betrayed wife, but as a woman reborn. Part 7. Facing the past. When I first heard that Ethan was moving back, a knot formed deep in my stomach. It wasn't just fear, it was the sudden realization that the past wasn't done with me yet. The man who had betrayed everything we built was coming back into the picture, threatening to stir wounds I was barely keeping closed. I tried to prepare myself for the inevitable, but nothing could steel me for the flood of emotions when he finally reached out. His message was brief, a request to meet, to talk one last time. My first instinct was to ignore him, to protect the fragile peace I'd fought so hard to create. But somewhere deep inside, a flicker of curiosity, or maybe a need for closure, nudged me to say yes. The cafe where we met was quiet, a neutral ground filled with the aroma of coffee and whispered conversations. Ethan looked older, the weight of regret etched in his eyes and the slight slump of his shoulders. He was no longer the man I'd adored, nor the stranger who betrayed me, but someone caught somewhere in between. "I'm sorry," he began, voice trembling. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I've changed, that I was a coward, and I lost the best thing I ever had." For a moment, I saw the man I once loved, but the years of pain had taught me to see beyond words. "I don't know if you've really changed, Ethan," I replied evenly, "but I do know I've grown stronger. This isn't about you anymore. It's about me, reclaiming my life, my happiness." He nodded, a flicker of sadness passing over his face. "I wish I could take it all back." "You can't," I said firmly, "but you don't get to dictate my future." That conversation was a turning point. It wasn't a reunion or a rekindling, it was an acknowledgement of the past and a refusal to let it control my future. Afterward, I felt lighter, freed from the last ties that bound me to that chapter. Daniel was waiting for me outside the cafe, a quiet smile on his face. When I slipped my hand into his, it felt like the first real touch of hope in a long time. Together, we walked away from betrayal, from pain, from a past that no longer defined me. I realized then that the hardest part wasn't just surviving the betrayal, but learning to trust again, in love, in myself, and in the future. And for the first time in years, I believed that love could be kind, true, and healing. Part 8. Reclaiming myself. The days after that meeting with Ethan felt surreal, like I had stepped out of a storm and into the calm afterward. For so long, I'd carried the weight of betrayal like a heavy cloak. But now, I was shedding it, piece by piece. Daniel and I grew even closer, not because everything was perfect, but because we were real, with all our flaws, fears, and hopes. Love, I learned, wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tales. It was about presence, patience, and the courage to keep showing up even when things were hard. I took time to rediscover who I was outside the shadow of my marriage. I traveled, something I'd postponed for years. I surrounded myself with friends who lifted me up and stopped apologizing for needing space and healing. Therapy remained a quiet pillar in my life, a place where I learned to forgive myself, to release shame, and to embrace strength. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting, it was choosing peace over bitterness. One afternoon, while sitting in my favorite park, watching children play, I felt a profound sense of peace. My heart, once shattered by lies and loss, was whole again, not because the pain disappeared, but because I learned to live alongside it without being consumed. I'm not the same woman I was before. I'm stronger, wiser, and more compassionate to myself and others. The man I married, the stranger he became, taught me the harshest lessons, but also led me to a deeper truth. My worth was never defined by someone else's love. As I close this chapter, I'm not bitter or broken. I'm hopeful that love can heal, that trust can be rebuilt, and that even after the darkest betrayals, light remains. This is my story, one of heartbreak, survival, and rebirth, and I share it in the hope that anyone walking through the fire of betrayal will find strength to rise again. Because sometimes, the greatest love story is the one you write for yourself.